I guess to get rolling, I'm talking to you from Eastern Scarborough today, which for thousands of years, this area has been traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and more recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. So today I'm going to talk to you about some work I've been doing to create an open source data collection and mapping system for use in community engaged and experiential learning exercises. So I was initially considering this for use in undergraduate teaching. For the last 5 years at the University of Toronto Scarborough, I've been working through assignments and exercises with students where I've designed data collection exercises in collaboration with Eastern Scarborough community hubs and groups like the East Scarborough Storefront, the Urban Alliance on Race Relations. But up until now, those have been completed with other tools. And I'm now ready to actually move some of those assignments onto the system that I'm describing today. So this year, working with Stephanie and the teaching that she's been doing at the iSchool, we organized mapping exercises for grad students. And based on the experience that I've had, sort of being able to sort of sit in the background and let her worry about the teaching side of things while I just focused on the technical side, I'm ready to actually launch this in some of my own courses. Learning objectives in designing these exercises, I want students to compare and contrast abstractions derived from the world with their perceptions and experiences of the world. To that end, I often ask them to go out and make focused observations about areas around campus or across the city, and to think critically about how our data models do or don't reflect the reality that they experience. The experiences are also intended to build spatial thinking and skills, and with the technological focus of web mapping underlying what we're doing and dealing with media, it's to build a range of digital competencies as well. So I'm going to switch over to my slides now, which should be that one. And go from there. So what I'm talking about here, so about 5 years ago, I decided, well, let's back up on this collaborative online GIS stuff. 15 years ago, if I was building this, I would have started with a GIS and I would have adapted it to push everything onto the web and build in all the features for sharing and managing the workflows around getting data in and getting data out. 5 years ago, I decided, and in fact, 15 years ago, I was working on Nunalit with Stephanie and Peter and some of the others at the GCRC, so at Carleton University. So moving on from that, 5 years ago, I decided, yeah, I think the world's changed with this stuff. I think now if I was going to do this, the hard part is all the workflows, managing users, managing publication rights, managing access, and geographic information is widely spread enough now that I can probably get at least rudimentary support for location by starting with something that does the other stuff really good and looking for add-ons and extensions that would add the location stuff. So this was my thought, and after looking around at a number of content management systems, I settled on trying to do this with Drupal, which is an open source management content management system. It's fairly widely used. There's probably 1 million websites running Drupal around the world right now. And it supports a wide range of applications, blogs, news sites, e-commerce, that kind of thing. So I looked into it and decided to try this out. So yes, as Stephanie says, my working title is kind of shifting all the time. Not all the time. I've been living with Geodrupal for a long time, but Geodrupal is too broad for me. So GeoMedia is probably, which stands for Geographic Information and Media, is probably the front runner for what I'll probably name this for. But right now my demo website uses the name Geodrupal, so I'll stick with that. So this is a packaging of community extensions. So Drupal does all the content management, access controls, publishing controls, all that kind of stuff, and it does that stuff really well. but it's been left to the community to actually add support for geographic information. So to be able to store, edit, display geographic information, location information, that's mostly community contributions right now, which aren't part of the core. So I've been working with that. I've done a couple of bug fixes there. And I'm talking about content management. So then the question is, what is content? So in Drupal, a piece of content is information to be presented and managed. So it's sort of a fundamental building block of your data model. So in this case, what I'm showing you is a community observation location where somebody has gone out and looked at the question of housing density and made comments about how that housing density in that area compares to density in other places. I'm not going to spend too long talking about this example. This is a simple example that I developed with first-year students in another system, and I've now adapted as a demonstrator data set here. A content type in Drupal is a bundle of fields, a bundle of field types. So everything that I've just drawn a red box around is a field within this content type. So this content type is called a documented location, and each red box represents one field within that. The interesting thing in Drupal is that administrative policies for different content types, who can access them, who can edit them, whether they can be shared, exported, that kind of thing. All of those administrative policies are specified at the level of a content type. So I can have a different set of administrative policies for this content type than I would have for another content type. And that makes it very flexible in terms of how I create data models and how I create workflows for different people, students, instructors, editors, writers, however many of those roles I want to create. I can set up different administrative policies for the different building blocks in my data model using that. Fields can be as simple as text or numbers, so there's a number of them shown on this example, or they can be relatively rich, where they can be attached or uploaded multimedia, photos, video, audio, or they can be references to other content, so you can create references through your data model between different types of documents. And they can be references to controlled vocabularies, taxonomies, they can be tag sets. So there's a number of different ways that you can build pretty complicated data models here. Every content type has its own editing form, which just looks like a million other web editing forms you would have seen. So the sample site that I've put up, and which has me still using the Geodrupal name, is this demo site with that URL shown at the bottom. And I'll copy that and paste that into I will copy that and paste that into the chat. So you can visit this site. You can view the information at this site without logging in. To actually edit anything, you would need to log in. But what this site shows is, again, simple data model, which is built around the idea of these observations of housing density at various locations. And the assignment that I posed for my students was, here's a bunch of Stats Canada dissemination area boundaries. We have a habit of drawing maps where we treat the entire area within a dissemination area as being uniform. So my question to you is, go out and look at a dissemination area and figure out whether or not housing density, as an example, is consistently uniform throughout that area. And so this gets them to think about how to make observations about different types of things. So the ones I suggested to them was, what does the housing look like? What does the road design look like? What is the land use looking like? Do you see things being similar or different? So that was the basic design of that assignment. But as I said earlier, so just to quickly go through a few features of this content management system that make this quite useful for both these teaching uses that I'm doing, but also I think for community-based data collection, is again this idea that you've got role-based permissions. So within this system, I've designated different users as different roles. So there are instructors, there are teachers, and in the case of this website, there are people who are just not logged in and just showing up as visitors. So there's actually a fourth role as well, which is the site administrator. But in terms of the dissemination area boundaries, the idea is that the instructor would set these all up ahead of time and have them prepared for the students to go out and do their exercise. So each student is basically selecting one dissemination area that they will visit and collect data in. The instructor sets those up. So only the instructor has edit and publish permissions, but students and site visitors can actually view these things. By contrast, the housing density observations are set up so that students that are logged in can edit and publish their own contributions. Instructors have access to publish and edit all housing density observation locations, and site visitors can only view these. So again, your model and the way your workflows work can become fairly complex based on the fact that you're able to put different administrative policies in place based on which data type you're talking about. Second feature that I wanted to mention was, up until now I've been talking about content as discrete units, packets of information. Where the content management system gets quite useful is it has really flexible query capabilities. And within Drupal, the term view refers to basically a query and a result format. So when you're talking about different views, you can define views as being based on different data types, crossing data types, but your view defines basically queries that you want to do and the format of the result. So here I'm showing a search box, which is just one view. So in this case, I'm looking at a view of data that says, I don't care what kind of content it is, find anything that refers to a bus. And just give it to me in a textual display. The map that I'm showing, on the other hand, well, it's also built on Drupal views. In this case, what it's doing is I've created views that do a query based on different content types. So one view does a query to say, get me all of the dissemination areas that are within this bounding box. The other view says, get me all of the documentation, all the density observation locations within this bounding box. And in each of those cases, it asks for those views to be returned as GeoJSON streams. So the GeoJSON data then is basically pulled into, in this case, leaflet software, and it builds the map based on those things. But all of these things at the lowest level in terms of the content management system are showing up as just different types of views. And views are subject to all the same policies in terms of publishing and access control. So if I want a particular location on my map to not show up publicly, all I have to do is go in and flip a switch that says, this is no longer published, and it will no longer show up in search results. It will no longer show up on the maps. And then finally, just the third feature that I was going to mention quickly today was the idea of importing and exporting data. So from the start with this system, I've had the idea that I want to be able to organize these mapping exercises as collaborative exercises for me and students interacting with communities, or else just working on our own to do these experiential learning exercises. I'm not worried about building complex analysis into this kind of a platform. In some ways, the Drupal support for geographic information is fairly rudimentary at this point. I've had to fix a couple of pretty basic bugs to get this working. But I've still been able to get quite a long way in terms of what I want to do. And the way I've been able to justify that is as long as the system gives me really good import and export capabilities to be able to get data in and get data back out, then I can take it elsewhere to go and do complex analysis, and I'm not worried about whether or not I can or can't do that here. And so far Drupal's been, it's a little unwieldy at times for this, but it's worked okay. In terms of getting this set up, and so I'm going to be using this year to teach courses. I'm very confident that the student experience is going to be good. The whole interface looks pretty familiar. The fact that I can let them control publishing their own material, whether or not they want it to be visible to the rest of the class, that's all fine, because as an instructor, I can still go in and actually see their work for marking purposes. As an instructor, managing the work with the students, seeing their work, the search facilities, that's all pretty familiar and straightforward and easy to do. Defining the data models, there's a bit of a learning curve. So a new instructor coming into this to look at this system and define the data models, there's a lot of documentation on Drupal that tells you how to do it, but it's a bit of a learning curve. The one that I'm most worried about in being able to hand off this system so that somebody else could work with this is really the site administration side of things. And so I'm going to be doing some work over the summer. Stephanie and I are planning at least a small workshop where I'm going to be working at developing some training materials, some virtual machine images of this system so that we can walk a couple of other people through the whole side of how do you run a Drupal system? How do you run a Geodrupal system? How do you get this up and running and working with it? But that's the one where I see if I want to see other people pick up this tool and start to work with it, it's really that administration side of things that's going to probably be the most difficult to crack. The open source gives you a lot of control over where your data lives and the policies you want to put in place. If that's not really important to you, you can use Drupal's hosting services, but you will sort of give up some control in that case. And really with that, I will stop talking and see if there's any questions.
Thanks, Glenn. I don't see any questions yet, but we have a comment. Seems like a good teaching tool. I like the exercise of housing density because it helps students better understand that maps are not the real world, but abstracts of the real world. For information, GeoMedia is an already existing commercial platform.
Yes, Trevor, I looked at all kinds of flavors of this. This is actually the term that Stephanie and I are talking about right now. Geodrupal was briefly picked up as a term about 7 years ago, but it seems like that project never really got off the ground. So Geodrupal is actually available. It's just too broad. So the one I'm sort of playing with right now is GeoMedia, which actually loosely stands for Geographic Information and Media, but I don't like having the A as just being and. So I'm sort of playing with Geographic Information Annotation and Media.
That's quite the handle.
So Byron's just asked, am I using open layers? I absolutely could. So Drupal and the geographic extensions to it allow you to, there are extensions for leaflet. There was a very long history of software release version upgrades in Drupal. It took them almost a decade to get off of version 7 and onto version 8, which is what I'm running now. So version 7 had complicated open layers capabilities as well as leaflet capabilities. The leaflet capabilities showed up first in version 8, so that's what I'm using right now. And it has capabilities to let you basically use web forms to define the maps and some of those capabilities. The example site that I linked to in my talk and that you can go and play with is actually using a custom built front map, because the web form map definitions they work okay for simple maps, but if you want to build a couple of different layers in and do a couple of interesting things with them, you get beyond the capabilities a little fast. Drupal has a theming system built into it, and once you sort of hook into the theming system, it turns it into a platform where you can actually apply virtually any JavaScript library to it. So using that and a little bit of custom coding, I could do leaflet maps, I can do open layer maps, I could do D3JS visualizations, I could do timeline.js timelines. All that stuff becomes available to you if you're willing to write a little bit of code.
Okay,
yes, and
thanks.
Stephanie's comment is good. We got some feedback from students through her courses that was quite useful in helping us to sort out some of the initial usability issues when we were working out the roles between us and students, and how to work with the system. So getting that going this year was actually quite a useful step for us. Thanks, Stephanie.